There's something different about people who grew up in the 1970s, and psychology can actually prove it. We've always assumed that more supervision, more structure, more protection makes better, stronger adults. But the generation that grew up in the 1970s proves that completely wrong. Because you didn't grow up with supervision, you grew up with trust. You remember what a summer morning felt like. You opened your eyes, and the whole day was just there. No plan, no schedule, nobody telling you where to be. Your parents had two rules: go outside and be home before dark. That was it. You walked out the door and the world opened up. The whole neighborhood, the woods at the end of the block, the creek down the road, the empty lot where there was always something going on. You'd come home with a scraped knee, grab something to eat, and head right back out again. You stayed out all day until the streetlights came on. That was the only clock that mattered. Not your parents' watch, the sky. And every kid back then knew exactly what those lights meant. You didn't need to be called in, you just knew. Looking back now, it's kind of a miracle any of you made it. But what a way to grow up. The street had its own rules, its own life. You knew every kid on the block by first name, which neighbor's yard you could cut through and which one would chase you off, who had the good popsicles. That neighborhood wasn't just where you lived. It was your whole world. And adults looked out for kids who weren't theirs. You could fall off your bike 3 blocks from home, and a woman you'd never met would bring you inside, clean up your scrape, hand you a sandwich and a glass of lemonade, then send you back out. No panic, no phone calls, just a neighbor being a neighbor. People knew each other. They looked out for one another. And for a lot of people who grew up in the 70s, that's one of the things they miss most. Not just the freedom, the feeling that someone always had your back, and that trust changed the way you grew up. You were feral, and you were civilized, both at the same time. Outside, you were completely wild, climbing trees that were too high, building bike ramps that definitely weren't safe, riding farther than your parents knew. You got hurt sometimes, but every scraped knee taught you something. That tree showed you exactly how high was too high. That ramp taught you the difference between a hard landing and a trip to the emergency room. You learned by doing, but the moment you walked back through that front door, everything changed. Your parents were not your friends. They were the authority. If they told you to be home by dinner, you were home by dinner. If they said no, that was usually the end of the conversation. Looking back, it was a strange balance. Outside, you had almost unlimited freedom. Inside, there were clear rules. And somehow, those two things worked together. Back then, if you said you were going to do something, people expected you to do it. The phone rang, and you had no idea who it was. You picked it up anyway. One phone, usually hanging on the kitchen wall. No caller identification. No voicemail. Your mom was on it constantly. The cord stretched halfway across the house. And somehow, 40 years later, you still remember your home phone number. The same was true when you made plans. If you told someone you would meet them at 2 o'clock, you showed up at 2 o'clock. There was no texting, no last-minute cancellations. There was no way to send a message saying you were running 10 minutes late. If you weren't there, they assumed you weren't coming. So people showed up. Your word mattered because it was all anyone had. The house was quiet when you got home from school. You pulled the key from under the flower pot, unlocked the door, and stepped into an empty house. There was just the hum of the refrigerator. No parent waiting. No one telling you what to do next. So you made yourself a snack, started your homework, or headed back outside until dinner. You figured it out on your own, day after day, year after year. You didn't think of it as independence. For you, that was just Tuesday. And if there was one thing every 70s kid learned early, It was how to keep themselves occupied. When you were bored, nobody rescued you. Your mother didn't even look up from folding laundry. She just said, "Go find something to do, or I'll find something for you to do." You knew exactly what that meant, so you disappeared for the afternoon. Maybe you rode your bike. Maybe you read the same book for the third time. Maybe you built something out of scraps in the garage. Nobody entertained you. You figured it out yourself. And somehow, something always came from that boredom. A game, an adventure, a new idea, an entire afternoon built out of almost nothing. Looking back, that's what made it so different. You weren't given something to do. You learned how to create something to do. You also built things, fixed things, took things apart. Not because anyone told you to, because you were curious. You pulled apart old radios to see what was inside. You took the back off broken televisions. You fixed your bike with whatever tools you could find in the garage. Half the time, you had no idea what you were doing. You just started. Sometimes you fixed it. Sometimes you made it worse. Either way, you learned something. Nobody handed you instructions. You figured things out by trying. And that wasn't just true for broken radios. When something went wrong, you sat with it alone. Someone said something that hurt. Maybe you failed a test. Maybe you had a fight with your best friend. You went to your room, lay on your bed, and stared at the ceiling. You couldn't text anyone. Couldn't scroll through your phone. The phone was in the kitchen and your mom was probably already using it. So you just sat with it. That tight feeling in your chest. And eventually, without doing anything at all, it passed. Psychologists call that emotional self-regulation. Today, it's considered one of the strongest signs of a stable, successful adult. Back then, you didn't have a name for it. You were just a kid lying on your bed, waiting for tomorrow. And somehow, you always made it through. When you failed, nobody made it easier. You struck out with the bases loaded. Your science fair project didn't work. You forgot your lines in the school play, and it hurt. But no adults came to comfort you right away. You failed, felt it, and figured out what to do differently next time. Psychologists call this learning to see failure as information, not identity. Maybe that's why so many people who grew up in the 70s handle setbacks differently. When something goes wrong, you don't stay down for long. You look at what happened, learn from it, and get back up. You also had to deal with people on your own. When two friends were fighting and you were stuck in the middle, you figured it out yourself. No teacher stepping in. You learned to read a room. You could tell when someone wasn't really okay. You knew who the leader was, who kept the peace, and who would go along with anything. You learned when to speak up and when to stay quiet. That kind of people reading wasn't taught. You picked it up slowly over the years, just by figuring things out on your own. Back then, life moved a little slower. Saturday mornings were sacred. Cartoons, a bowl of cereal. You walked to the TV, turned the dial, and walked back. You were the remote control. And once a year, The Wizard of Oz came on. Everyone knew the night in advance. You planned your whole evening around it. You learned to wait for things. Christmas morning felt like a miracle because you waited 365 days for it. And psychologists say that when you grow up waiting for things, you tend to have more self-control and steadier relationships later in life. Then you'd go to your room and put a record on. The Eagles, Fleetwood Mac, Aerosmith in their prime, new songs you first heard on the radio. You knew every word, every pause between lines. Music wasn't just background noise. It was personal, private, yours. Nobody watching, nobody rating it, just you and the record player. That kind of freedom, just feeling things without anyone watching, You don't really see that anymore. And at night, on television, a voice would ask, "It's 10 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?" 100% of the time, your parents had absolutely no idea. Now you watch your grandchildren on a summer afternoon. They're inside, screens in their hands, nowhere to be and nowhere they need to go. And you feel something that's hard to explain. Not anger, not judgment, just a quiet sadness for something they'll never get to experience. The freedom of leaving the house in the morning with no plan. The neighbor who helped you up when you fell off your bike. The music that felt like it belonged only to you. The streetlights that told every kid it was time to come home. The phone number you still remember after all these years. Maybe that's why people who grew up in the 70s connect with videos like this. Sometimes you just need a reminder that those memories were real. The freedom was real. The friendships were real. And the world really did feel different. You survived a childhood that would get parents arrested today. None of us knew how special it was at the time. But looking back now, we know. If you grew up in the 70s, what's one thing from that world you wish hadn't disappeared? Tell us in the comments.